What did you guys think when we woke up on Monday morning to find out that Chrystia Freeland was no longer the finance minister, yet we were expecting a fall economic statement to be delivered that afternoon?
What a clown show.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everybody. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Tanya.
And we bring you another very special interview with our good friends and corporate government watchdogs over at the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. They are a nonpartisan federation that works in all of our best interests to ensure that any government that is in power is ensuring that we pay the least amount of taxes as possible. And they call out...
There's no taxpayer waste.
Yeah, they've been calling it the carbon tax. They've been calling it the capital gains tax. They've been calling it all of the taxes that the Liberals have been trying to put on us. And it is great that they're joining us today. So please welcome to Northern Perspective. You know him, Franco Terrazzano, but you may not know her, Chris Sims from the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hey.
So Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director, and Chris Sims, the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. I think everybody knows Franco, but Chris, why don't you give us a quick overview of who you are and how you came to work for the Canadian Taxpayer Federation?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having me on. Like your programming. Thank you so much for covering this stuff. So I've been in the arena for about 25 years now, mostly as a journalist, both mainstream journalist working on Parliament Hill and what you would call a startup, something like Sun News Network. I was there from startup to shut down. I've also jumped on the other side of the fence here and there. I've been a staffer on Parliament Hill, so I know where a lot of bodies are buried. And I've been with the CTF now, I think, 8 years, since 2007. So back out west here, my home base is in Lethbridge, Alberta, which is just around the corner from Franco's mom's house. So it works out perfectly.
Perfect.
And for those who don't know, Chris and Franco have their own videos on the Canadian Taxpayer Federation YouTube channel. Be sure to head over there, subscribe, check it out. They go into far more detail than we could ever hope to here at Northern Perspective because they live and breathe this stuff every single day. So let's get right into it. What did you guys think when we woke up on Monday morning to find out that Chrystia Freeland was no longer the finance minister, yet we were expecting a fall economic statement to be delivered that afternoon?
What a clown show. was the first thing that went through my mind. I mean, like budget days or fiscal update days, I mean, they're kind of like the Super Bowl for us tax fighters at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, right? So I remember that morning, we're preparing for the fall economic statement, we're getting all the numbers crunched, we're doing a whole bunch of interviews, talking to people about how bad the Trudeau government is at managing our money. And then all of a sudden on Twitter, we see this resignation letter from Chrystia Freeland resigning from the finance minister spot. And I mean, it went off like a ticking time bomb in the CTF group chat, let me tell you, right? But what I really noticed from the letter that Freeland posted is she's calling out Trudeau over, political gimmicks, wasting money, the fact that you got to keep your fiscal powder dry. So a couple things come to mind. Number one, really? Freeland, like, Like, have you not been in the finance role for like the last number of years, and now you're talking about wasteful government spending after you've been at the helm with deficits in the tens of billions of dollars? Like, are you serious? Is this a joke? April Fool's Day comes a little bit early. But the second thing that I noticed, and I think which is more substantive, is that this is the second finance minister who has resigned and who has warned about the government's overspending, right? Recently Freeland, but before Freeland, Bill Morneau also resigned. And after he resigned, he was saying like Trudeau was spending like crazy. He's not focusing on the economy. So I thought that was really interesting to see another finance minister calling out Trudeau for his crazy amount of government spending, for expanding the size and scope of government, and for not focusing on the economy.
Yeah, what did you think, Chris? Because our take was a little like Franco's. Like I think Tanya was still kind of a little groggy when I found out, and I went to like shake her. I'm like, Freeland just resigned. She's like, all right, I'll be up in a minute. And then I immediately thought, what the heck's going to happen this afternoon without a finance minister to deliver this fall economic statement? What was going through your head?
It was pretty interesting. It kind of brought up memories. So again, I was on the Hill for a long time. And I remember when then Finance Minister Paul Martin hinted that he didn't have super duper confidence left in then Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, and all hell broke loose on the Hill. And that was back before alternative media. That was back when the press gallery still had a stranglehold on the narrative. And so the wheels really fell off that fast. So this was bigger and messier because, of course, we've got a very different Liberal government in power right now. We do not have a balanced budget. We have unmoney, as I like to say. This Trudeau government has doubled the national debt, and Chrystia Freeland played a big role in that. So she helped as finance minister to double the national debt. She did all sorts of stuff. She was a huge fan of the carbon tax, big cheerleader of capital gains tax, froze bank accounts of people who dared to disagree with her. So please, let's save the sonnets of her standing up to Trudeau. So that all went through my head. And then exactly to your point, it went down to procedure, saying, okay, at 4 o'clock this afternoon, somebody needs to stand up in the House of Commons and present the fall economic statement. To Franco's point, exactly. This is like a baby budget. It's a mini budget. And so they all have to stay, they can't speak, right? Everything is verboten. You can't talk until 4 p.m. Eastern. And there was no one. And I don't know if you guys were watching at the time. When at 4 o'clock rolled around, the speaker stood up. He said, well, parliamentary procedure dictates I need to interrupt proceedings right now and call upon the finance minister to present the fall economic statement. So that was bizarre. And at the end of the day, it was the House leader that basically dropped it like a little bomb and scurried back up behind the curtains. And we eventually did get Dominic LeBlanc. All of this is to say, they blew even their own lame fiscal guardrail. The idea of only going $40 billion over budget is already disgusting. And now we've got more than $60 billion of a deficit. It's pretty bad for taxpayers.
Yeah, I used to run budgets for organizations, and we always had this kind of unofficial guardrail of percentages. Like you set your target, and it's pretty bad to get up to 9% over target, but if you go into double digits, you better be packing your bags, because that's showing just terrible fiscal management. But the fact that she set her target, and to your earlier point on Northern Dispatch, Franco, she wrote her own test and gave herself all of the answers, and then proceeded to operate like the cast on Celebrity Jeopardy on SNL and completely bungle all the answers. So she not only went above 9%, above 10%, it was like 55% past her own guardrail. And then she has the gall to turn around and say, I don't agree with you, Mr. Prime Minister. This is all of your fault, even though I've been pushing this, the last 9 years. And I was just in the Senate committee last week pushing the HST push, or the HST holiday, which I completely disagree with you, by the way, that it's a gimmick. Like, what? I don't get it. I really don't get it. So when you guys heard 61.9 billion. Were you surprised? Were you shocked? Were you not surprised and still shocked? Like, what was it?
Well, when I first saw that $62 billion deficit number, the first thing that came to my mind is like, no wonder Freeland resigned. like, I wouldn't want to read that fiscal update either, right? There's no amount of money you could pay me to give that bad news to Canadians. But I mean, it's kind of interesting because, Ottawa is a very gossipy town, right? And so this $62 billion potential deficit number had been floating around for about a week or so. I believe Brian Lilly of the Toronto Sun was the first to report about it publicly, but I thought there was no possible way. I was like, these guys are pretty bad, which is an understatement, but even they couldn't blow through their own fiscal guardrail by $20 billion. So I thought what the government was doing was leaking a very bad number, and then they were going to come in under that number to try to get kudos from everyone. That's what I thought was going on. But no, it turns out the government just is completely incompetent, which when it comes to managing our money. And like, folks, I'm sorry for laughing. It's no laughing matter, but it's either that or I'd be crying online with you all, and nobody wants to see that. So if we can get into the nuts and bolts of this, number one, a $40 billion deficit, which was their guardrail, is a failure. It's not the pandemic. Inflation has been fattening government coffers for years, and the government has continually taken more money from Canadians for years. A $40 billion deficit would have been completely unacceptable. The fact that the government is running a $62 billion deficit, blowing through its own fiscal guardrails by an extra $20 billion, that's a clown show. It's a disaster. There's really no other way to put it.
And when it comes to even this $250 check that they were talking about, like that would have added, I think, another $4.6 billion on top of that. And I don't think that was included in that. So, Chris, this could have ended up upwards of 67 billion. Like, what are Canadians to make about that? That Trudeau is just willing to spend with reckless abandon to destroy our financial situation in this country even further, just for his own political gain.
I'll just be blunt. Like, the average working Canadian should be furious, like absolutely furious right now. To put a point on it, so our national debt is now $1.2 trillion with a T. That number is so big it's hard to really contemplate. But if you started, like, imagine you're Scrooge McDuck and you're diving through all the loonies right in your vault, and you started counting up loonies to count to 1 trillion, it would take you 30,000 years to do that. That's how much debt we are in right now. To give you an idea even of this deficit that they just ran, so around $62 billion, we often hear from the Liberals trying to talk about, oh, we need to feed families or we need to feed kids at school. This deficit is the equivalent amount of money of the grocery bills for 3.6 million families for a year. So don't give me this, oh, we're taking on money so you don't have to. No, all of this is our debt. All of this is our deficit. And frankly, people should believe Trudeau when he says things like, the budget will balance itself, we'll grow the economy from the heart outwards, and I don't think about monetary policy. Yeah, that's really clear, super clear. It's a disaster. And so everybody, I don't care who you voted for in the past or what jersey you like to cheer for, they should be emailing their member of parliament and saying, this is absolutely unacceptable. Stop wasting my money, knock this off, and balance the budget. Because my grandkids, my kids are in their teens. My grandchildren are going to be working to try to pay this thing off. It's a disaster.
And you then have Jagmeet Singh, who is doing his rounds, going around saying, oh, well, Justin Trudeau should resign, but he isn't saying the whole government should resign. He's just talking about Justin Trudeau. So I'm okay with the guy who was pushing everybody to spend this, but I'm not okay with that. But I'm okay with everybody else who voted for this. So I'm okay with that. And you don't want Pierre Poilievre because he's going to cut. Now, that's all he's saying. He's saying he's going to cut this, and this. What he isn't saying is that he's going to cut anything. So I'm taking away from that he's implying if the NDP were in power, heaven forbid, but if the NDP were in power, they not only wouldn't cut anything, but they may also spend with even more reckless abandon than the Liberals. What's the take on both of you on how the NDP could possibly approach our financial and fiscal responsibility should they get into power?
Can I just jump in there for a second with a little nerdy point? Yeah. So it was very important on how he answered that question. He said specifically to that scrum of the media, the press gallery, that he wants Trudeau to resign. So that would mean he'd step down, everybody would fumble the ball for a little while, but the Liberal Party would still be holding government. well, they have an interim leader, blah, blah, blah. That would limp things along until late winter, early springish. That is different from saying, I will vote non-confidence and I'll do it this afternoon, which is why you now even have the mainstream media chewing his leg off, going after Jagmeet Singh and the leader of the NDP. I just wanted to point that out, that there's a difference between him saying, I want this current leader of a party to step down, and I will vote non-confidence.
100%. Franco, did you have something?
Yeah, I'll just point out that you also heard later another one of the NDP MPs, his name escapes me, but was doing the media round saying, well, we might vote non-confidence if Trudeau's still around sometime in late February or
Peter
March.
Julian.
That was Peter Julian. Yeah.
Now, what's so interesting about late February, early March? Well,
Let's put our thinking caps on.
Let's put our thinking caps on, right? Late February, or February the 25th to be exact, is when Singh is eligible for his taxpayer-funded platinum pension. February 25th. So I don't know, maybe I'm a little skeptical of politicians, but isn't it a little suspicious that now NDP MPs are saying, well, they might vote non-confidence in late February, early March, after Singh is eligible for his pension, right? And of course, Singh would be walking away with about a $2.4 million taxpayer-funded pension. That would be his lifetime pension. So isn't that just a little suspicious? But look, in terms of how the NDP would govern, I mean, it's tough to say, right? We're currently filming this video on planet Earth, and I don't think the budget would be anywhere close to planet Earth. It'd be somewhere on Pluto. It'd be so crazy. But I do want to, if I can, just poke a hole through one of the government's biggest talking points of this budget, right? Because we're talking about a $62 billion deficit, and what the government has essentially said to give a reason why its deficit is so big, $20 billion over its own fiscal guardrail, is well, look, folks, it's not our fault. These were one-time expenses that emerged. Well, even if you remove those one-time expenses, the government's deficit would have still been over $40 billion, right? And not to mention that next year's deficit, or this year's deficit, sorry, is forecasted at $48 billion. Those one-time expenses aren't carrying through, so the government is still blowing its fiscal guardrail again this year. But more to the point, this isn't the first time Trudeau has blown through his own fiscal guardrail, far from it. And secondly, look, any prudent family or business will tell you, if an unexpected expense comes up, let's say a leaky roof, what happens? You fix the leaky roof and you cut spending elsewhere. What you do not do is fix the leaky roof, then take out your credit card, buy a brand new flat screen TV and a couple new BMW SUVs.
And you say, sorry, honey, we blew through our budget, but it was a one-time expense. We still had to get the TV.
Or Franco, don't forget, what is it? How much on airplane food? 70 grand on that veal stuff that I couldn't pronounce. He does this all the time. And correct me if I'm wrong, he took power, he won in 2015, 2016. They've never balanced the budget. Not one time. This isn't oh my gosh, there's been a house fire. No. This thing has been roaring in flames since he took office. They've never balanced it.
So what's it mean for the government when they are continually running a deficit? And more importantly, what's it mean for taxpayers?
Well, what it means for the government, at least up until this point, is a couple things. Number one, it's not their money. It's not their money, right? In fact, the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, who was Chrystia Freeland, they've run these huge deficits year after year after year, and they give themselves higher pay. So, I mean, it means nothing to them from their own, pocketbooks. What it could mean for the government down the road is similar to what happened to governments in the 90s, where it becomes not a political decision, but a decision made by the bond fund manager saying, if you want to borrow money, we're going to charge you these huge interest rates. So what will end up happening if things keep going out of control is what happened in the 90s. I mean, look at Saskatchewan, where they shut down, about 50 community hospitals, right? Where outside pressures force the government to drastically cut spending. Now, what it means for taxpayers is completely different. So this is really bad news for taxpayers. Interest charges on the debt are costing more than $1 billion every single week. $1 billion is about the same amount of money it takes to build a new hospital. So we're losing out on a brand new hospital every single week because of the debt interest charges on the federal debt. Okay? But not just that. Think about it this way. Welcome to Canada, where you pay a federal sales tax to cover interest charges on Trudeau's debt. The interest charges this year, $54 billion. Federal sales tax revenue, $52 billion. So every single dollar you pay in the federal sales tax is going to pay interest on the debt.
And to just put that in context, as it relates to them blowing through those fiscal guardrails, so they are literally borrowing money to pay for the interest charges on the debt that they are digging themselves into a bigger hole. Like, many Canadians have been in this situation where they have to borrow from their credit card in order to pay, some of their other debts. And it's not a good position to be in, because it just digs yourself further, deeper into that debt hole. Now, the thing that is always on my mind, and I think this gets lost, is, okay, so we have this massive $1.2 trillion debt that is more than doubled under Justin Trudeau. In order to reduce those interest payments, we have to start paying down that debt. And in order to do that in any sort of meaningful way, you can't just be, even though it's a ton of money to us average Canadians, you can't just be putting $1 billion here and $1 billion there, because that's going to take over 1,000 years to actually pay that back. So for a conservative government coming in, or any future governments, how do you pay that down in any meaningful way so that you can reduce those interest charges, so you're not saddling the country and its great-grandchildren for debt in perpetuity?
Well, let me take the lead on that, because this is kind of what I do every single day. Look, number one, there has to be kind of a sea change in Canada. And I think we're getting there in terms of people's thoughts towards government, where people are looking at the government's taking more money from us. I mean, like, imagine your paycheck and essentially rip it in half, because that's going to governments across Canada. Okay? So, and people are seeing how much money the government's taking from them, and they're seeing the services getting no better, and in many ways getting worse, and people are starting to feel like they're getting ripped off. And they should feel that way, because they are getting ripped off, right? So fortunately, the change in culture is happening. People are starting to understand that government doesn't solve problems. Government subsidizes problems. So, that's a good thing. So what has to happen is the government has to cut spending. It has to cut spending. And you start with the little things first, right? Like, don't spend millions of dollars on government podcasts that nobody listens to. Don't spend $8 million building a barn on the Governor General's taxpayer-funded estate. How about don't spend more on food on a 4-day trip to Europe than the average family spends on food in 4 years? Do the little things right. Then there's the big things. Corporate welfare, the government putting taxpayers on the hook for about $30 billion in corporate welfare to multinational corporations like Honda, Volkswagen, Stellantis, and Northvolt. But the real key for any government serious about balancing the budget is cutting the size and cost of the bureaucracy. Okay? Since Trudeau took over, the cost of the federal bureaucracy increased by 73%. Trudeau has added 108,000 extra government bureaucrats. The bureaucracy now consumes half of the government's day-to-day spending. So, we've heard Poilievre say many times that if he's prime minister, he will fix the budget and cut taxes. That's a great promise. For Poilievre to deliver on that promise will be directly related to his ability to cut the size and cost of the federal bureaucracy.
And that's going to be a fight, right? That's going to be a fight. I think what Canadians should expect, and let us know what you think on this, Chris, is that, PSAC is a very large union. I think it's one of the largest in Canada, if not the largest. And if there's any sort of threat to them, they immediately pull the strike card. So Could we be expecting, if Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative government choose to go that route and say, listen, we're reducing the size of the public service significantly in order to save money and make this government more efficient, should we be expecting a government-wide strike from PSAC?
That's a great question. So I'm going to draw a little bit on my experience in talk radio. So back in the day in Ottawa at CFRA, I remember distinctly when the Trudeau government flipped the switch on the Phoenix pay system. And for folks who don't know what that is, it's basically software for their payroll system for the federal government. So all the little bureaucrats and big bureaucrats that work at the federal government, that's how they get paid. This dragged on for years, where people either weren't getting paid at all for legit work they were doing, like this was including like Coast Guard people that weren't getting paid, or they were getting crazily overpaid. So they're winding up with like tens of thousands of dollars that they're not allowed to touch. All this is to say that it was a complete dumpster fire. PSAC, which used to threaten strikes at any moment under the Harper government, didn't say anything, didn't say jack for an entire year. So I want to put a point on this, that there is an awful lot of politics when it comes to government unions. So yeah, you're going to see a lot of yelling there. Another point here, a second point, is that Mr. Poilievre's riding is right in that area. So this is going to be a sticky issue going into the next election. Third, correct me if I'm wrong, Franco, but could we still, he crunches numbers all the time. He's got like crazy degrees in economics. I just listen to him all the time we're in the car. So Franco, could we still go back to the projected spending? I think it was, you did the 2021-2022 budget. Would we balance the budget if we went back to those Trudeau projected numbers? Would we balance it still, or is it just gone off the rails?
Yeah, I'll have to take a look at the numbers following the fall economic statement.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, we could have balanced. So just before the fall economic statement with the revenue, we could balance the budget going back to what budget 2022 said we would spend in the next couple years. You would have a balanced budget next year, even reversing the capital gains tax hike. So one of the issues that you're seeing is that every year the government projects spending, and every year the government increases those projections. And you would essentially have a balanced budget in the next couple years, even reversing tax hikes, by just going back to what Trudeau said he was going to spend in budget 2022. And if I can remember correctly, nobody was shrieking about austerity when Trudeau tabled his 2022 budget. But hey, can I just add a couple things about PSAC and these government unions, and then Chris, jump back in. So what we need from a Poilievre government, or any government that's serious about being a champion of taxpayers, we essentially need them to say, get your sign and get in line. Because they are going to be...
Is that your line?
I don't think it is. No, I saw it on Twitter once.
Okay.
I don't know which side would be chanting that. Would it be the union, or would it be the Conservatives?
But look, I'm almost sure it was another politician in Canada who said it. I saw it on Twitter, and I'm just going to keep saying it because it's a great saying. So no, I didn't come up with it. I also didn't come up with some other sayings, but whatever. But here's why I say that. Because I remember when Premier Jason Kenney became the Premier of Alberta under the United Conservative government, okay? And look, what he was going to do was essentially hold the line on spending. Not cut it, really just hold the line on spending. And the government unions out there lit their collectives' hair on fire. So even if a Poilievre government comes, and let's say he just holds the line on spending, doesn't even cut spending, or even increases spending under inflation or population growth, the union bosses are still going to go nuts. So a Poilievre government might as well just rip the Band-Aid off and do what is right. Because regardless of what he does, the union bosses are going to go crazy. So he might as well just do the right thing and cut spending.
Agreed.
Well,
and just from experience, sorry to interrupt, back in the Harper government, I remember distinctly when then Prime Minister Stephen Harper said, hey, departments, we've just gone through a pretty bad time. We really need to balance the budget. Could you please find 5 to 8%-ish amount of savings in your departments? They freaked out. You'd think that he was canceling entire departments instead of asking for tiny amounts of savings, which I will point out is entirely possible. There's something called March Madness that happens in government all the time, drives me nuts. And it goes something like this. Hey, everybody, tick, tick, tick. I'm a bureaucrat. I'm writing out my email, my department-wide email. Our budget is coming up in February. We have this amount of money left over. Blow it. Find whatever stupid thing you can possibly waste a lot of money on. I'm not kidding. Like chair cushions, like mouse pads, whatever it is. We have to blow our entire budget, our allotment, or we won't get it back next year. They waste probably $1 billion at least every year doing this. So it's not, just sexy, stupid things like sex toy shows in Germany and all the silly things that they need to cut. They need to cut the boring, administrative, stupid things too, and we will save so much money.
Well, and I had to deal with that being part of government as well. We've talked a little bit about this on the show, where corporations, they will go through this exercise near their year end because they know they're not going to have that money next year. The difference is that money doesn't belong to Canadian taxpayers. That belongs to the corporation. So that's what people need to remember. And the other thing that sometimes happens is they'll say, okay, well, you need to find X amount of savings. Okay, that's fine. But a lot of times you don't even get to even find that savings, or they're coming after the tiniest departments to find that savings versus going after the big fish. One thing that we've also talked about on this show, and it's something that I saw in government, is there's a not really well-known internal government 10%, I'll call it agency tax. So everything that the agencies spend, whether it's in public works or if it's on software or hardware for IT, they have an internal body called Shared Services Canada, which administrates any of the IT contracts. They take a 10% administration fee on every single contract that an agency has, just because they don't do any work for you, but they take that 10% fee. My guess is because they can't get the proper funding in their budget, so they're just taking it from all of the agencies. What do you think about that practice?
Well, in my experience, I think that's what was paying for the warehouses full of dead laptops, wasn't it? Somebody has to keep the lights on in those places. Yeah, the Hill is just an enormous vacuum suck of taxpayers' money. And it's not even just like I said, the really shiny things. It's these dumb, boring administrative things. I wish we had a Doge up here in Canada. I wish we had a Department of Government Efficiency with the spirit of Elon Musk that can go through these departments and find these savings, because it really needs to happen.
They should just hire the CTF to come in and do it for them.
Oh, no need to spend tax dollars. Yeah. I mean, look, the homework is all out there, right? Like every year we do like a 75-page budget submission. The homework is there. Copy off the notes, right?
Yeah. Go. Feel free to copy the homework, and it would be easy. But anyhow, we are going into I think historic election year for Canada. An election's going to happen. You can even believe Jagmeet. That's probably the one thing that I will believe him on, is an election will happen in 2025. Whether it happens at the end of February, early March, or if we do go to October, which I don't believe we're going to, it's going to be transformational, I think, for this government, because Canadians, to your point, Franco, I think they've had enough. I think they've seen the effect of what wasteful spending and no financial control on our tax dollars has had on Canada, because they're seeing it themselves. And there needs to be some new controls put in. I completely agree with you, Chris, that we need a Department of Government Efficiency. Ironically, you're going to be bloating the government bureaucracy by adding that, but I think it's absolutely necessary. From what we've seen from the procurement system, it needs to be torn down to the studs, all the processes thrown out and rebuilt from the ground up. and it's not going to be a short process. That's the other challenging thing.
Yeah, and when the Conservative government gets in, it's not going to be instantly fixed. Like, it's going to take time. Do you guys have any idea of how long it's going to take before Canadians can see some results or at least some relief?
Yeah, even just the carbon tax, Franco. So let's say day one, to do this as fast as possible, Poilievre issues an order in council that reduces the carbon tax rate to 0% until they can repeal it. How long will that take to actually hit Canadians' wallets?
Not long at all. And I say that from experience because when I was the Alberta director before Chris, I mentioned Kenny was the premier in Alberta, and he scrapped the carbon tax with Bill 1. And it took like a couple weeks for it to actually get through, right? Like, in life and also in government and politics, where there is a will, there is a way. And if you really want to get something done, you can. Kenny proved it in Alberta with the carbon tax in particular is what I'm talking about, right? Now, in terms of timeline, actually, the longer it goes, the worse it's going to be for a potential Poilievre government in a couple ways. Number one, the longer it takes for him to cut spending and cut these taxes, the more airtime he's going to give to the big government activists who don't want Poilievre to cut spending or to balance the budget. So really, he has to do it right away. But the second thing that could happen is that once you give these other activists or the media more airtime, there's going to be more tension within his own caucus to stop those cuts, right? Like, that will happen, especially if he has a super majority in the House of Commons. But the big thing to remember here is, like, when a politician or the government says, you know, we will balance the budget, but it's going to take us like 4 years. Well, when you hear that, just think to yourself, when was the last time you actually went on a diet when you're like, yeah, I'll start in a month, right? Like, yeah.
It's now, bro, now.
Yeah, it's now. It has to happen for all those political reasons, economic reasons, and just life reasons. It has to happen immediately.
So if I had my top three that I want, if Pierre Poilievre becomes prime minister, before lunch, on first day, I would like him to scrap the carbon tax, defund the CBC and all media, because journalists should never be paid by the government, and cancel the gun grab. So if he can get all that done before lunch, before he starts eating his apple at noon, that would be great. And to Franco's point, you can move pretty darn fast. Just look how quickly they move when they're getting themselves a raise or they're trying to declare it to be Friday. So a funny thing, if you're ever watching the House of Commons and politicians want to play hooky and leave early, it'll be like a Wednesday or something. They'll just get the speaker to declare it to now be Friday, and poof, it's instantly Friday and they all get to leave. The government can move quickly when it wants to, and Poilievre has been on record several times saying that these big things are going to be dealt with right away, and he has to keep that promise. I think he will.
Well, and it's almost, not almost, I think it was a huge mistake for the government to just blast through the HST holiday as fast as they did, because they demonstrated how fast they can actually pass legislation through the House and the Senate.
There you go.
So
Perfect.
So for them to say, oh, well, this is going to take some time. No, you've set a precedent now. And to the point, Pierre's going to have a super majority. So they should be able to get, the stuff through the House very quickly. They're going to have a majority Trudeau appointed Senate. So that's going to be a little bit of a different challenge until he can appoint more senators from the Conservative side. But the precedent is there. So anyway, folks,
just real quick, if you can open the kitchen door at the restaurant and take a peek at what's going on there, how the sausage is being made. Poilievre isn't new to this. He was a staffer for a long time. He was a member of parliament. He was a parliamentary secretary, and he was a minister. So he knows how all these things work and where the gears actually start grinding. So he's got to get this stuff done real fast.
Well, and he also has a former speaker as one of his top lieutenants as well, who has demonstrated to be a huge asset when dealing with the current speaker and parliamentary procedures. So I think he has the team to do it. To your point, Franco, time will tell to see if the will is actually there. But if he does do this, and he fixes Canada. He could go down as one of the best prime ministers in Canadian history, or he could go down as one of the worst. Time will tell, and it depends on how he chooses to navigate the challenge that lays before him. So anyway, I think that's all the time we have. So thank you so much, Franco and Chris, for joining us on Northern Perspective. Have a wonderful, happy new year. Please take some time to yourselves away from the numbers and the spreadsheets. And we will see you in the new year, and we'll see how this shakes out.
Merry Christmas. Thank you.